What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is Shelf Appeal, the weekly show where I go over the comic books I picked up this Wednesday, give you my impressions on them, and let you know whether there's something you should go back to the shop for or not. So make sure you subscribe to get one of these every week. Also, make sure you subscribe and comment down below so you can be entered to win the signed copy number 1 of the variant cover Batman White Knight, signed by Sean Gordon Murphy. So that one's still going up, and the drawing's going to be on October 31st, so there's not much more time to enter. But to start off with, we're going to be talking about Amazing Spider-Man number 790. So Amazing Spider-Man 790 is kind of what I call a palate cleanser. So really what we have is a historical story where we have Parker Industries, and it is kind of in shambles after the events of Secret Empire. And finally, Peter's made it off of Mockingbird's couch and out into the public so he can make apologies to everybody that he's really disappointed, which is a very Peter Parker thing to do. And the reason that I call it a palate cleanser is because we kind of forego a lot of that. You know, there's a little bit of those kind of things that begin at the start of everything, but ultimately what we end up with is a clash between Fantastic Four's Human Torch as well as Peter Parker, and they all kind of take place inside the Baxter building, and then there's some repercussions with Harry Osborn, and it's really kind of like hitting the reset button, especially with what happens on the last page. So I haven't really been enamored with Amazing Spider-Man for a little bit. However, I do feel like this is, you know, a cleansing moment. So it's very refreshing to see these things move in this general direction, and I'm interested to see where the storyline goes, which is something that I can't really say for many Spider-Man titles in recent memory. So Amazing Spider-Man number 790. After 789, I was a little bit hesitant, but 790's got me back on board, and I'm even more excited for 791 and to see what rolls out until we get to issue number 800. So definitely a book that I would consider if I'm a Spider-Man fan. The next book I want to talk about is Punisher the Platoon number 2. So Punisher the Platoon number 2 is by Garth Ennis, and it's really about Frank Castle's first tour in Vietnam. And we find out that the narrator, who kind of left us at a cliffhanger that almost makes you think like they were there and experienced it, we find out that they're not. You know, they talk to one of the opposing, soldiers. Wow. I don't know why I had to search for that one, but they talked to one of the opposing soldiers, got the viewpoint of the Viet Cong at that point in time, and really kind of brought some parallels to the story that they were experiencing on the U.S. side and what Frank Castle's real first combat was like. You know, we already found out that he was going to rain hellfire down on anybody that was going to be potentially threatening his platoon, but when we see Frank Castle as a man of action, it's a very different story. And it has one of my favorite lines, you know, sometimes you got to let the devil in the door. And you can see where that kind of, not necessarily corruption, but that willingness to accept that there are dirtier things, there are, you know, unsavory methods that need to be, you know, used in certain times. And there's a very visceral scene on the battlefield. You know, there's a bayonet stab that's pretty crazy, and then once he gets onto the Maudus, ooh, that's bad. That's real bad news for anybody that's encroaching up that hill. And now we're going to get into a more siege-like situation, so it's very interesting. Punisher the Platoon, definitely a recommendation from me. It's a mini-series, so you can probably still get issue 1, grab issue 2 today, and then you're only going to have 4 left, and it's going to be a really good Punisher story. At least that's what it feels like. After Punisher the Platoon, though, we're going to talk about Thanos, so we're talking about the Phoenix Force in Thane, and that lasts for all of 3 pages. So the kind of sirens, or the witchy women that guard the quarry of the gods, banish the Phoenix from Thane so that way it can go back out into the universe and take part in every other single story that's involving the Phoenix right now, which is half of them. And, you know, we finally see the confrontation between Thanos and Thane, which, since he's depowered and no longer has the Phoenix Force, doesn't really matter. And basically, Thanos is back to being a bastard, you know, the bastard that we know and love, and has taken over his quadrant of the galaxy again, you know, on this small moon of desolation that is now a burial ground. And this is really a transition piece. So we see the success of Thanos, we see the banishment of Thane, we see that, you know, Nebula, the champion of the universe, and Eros are still together, but the big thing is that it's starting Donny Cates' storyline next issue with issue number 13, so we're going to have brand new art, brand new writer, and the title of this, and the arc that's going to be happening, Thanos Wins. So I find this to be kind of like a fitting but somewhat lackluster conclusion to the story of Thanos from Jeff Lemire, but I'm really excited to see where it goes in the next issue, so that's what I'm really excited for. So you can kind of avoid this one, but just get ready for something completely different the next time that we talk about Thanos. And then another book that's just a little bit different is Bloodshot Salvation. So this is where we see Ray, Magic, and their young daughter kind of gallivanting across everything. So we've got kind of a future setting that's happening when we've got Magic and Jesse, and then we also have Ray, who's headed out to meet Daddy for the first time. So what we find is a very cult-like environment where, you know, everybody's a child of Daddy, and that could be literal, that could be figurative, and based on some of the looks, it's probably pretty literal. So this is where we're going to finally get the confrontation. You know, we've got some heavy artillery, you know, some AR, some M16s and things like that that are being toted around by these rednecks in the middle of Ohio. And it's just really interesting because we see Rampage kind of coming after Jesse and Magic. And it's just really kind of crazy because all these other Bloodshots show up because Ray sent them, and everybody assumes that Ray's dead. So there's a lot more that's going to be going on here, and I feel like Jeff Lemire's setting up something big for the middle part of the arc, so I'm really excited to see where that goes. I've never really been a Bloodshot fan. I've never really been into the Valiant universe, but this is one of 3 books that I'm really excited about, so definitely recommend Bloodshot if it's something that you feel like you might be interested in. Of course, there is another book that I absolutely rave about that might not be for everybody, and that is Renato Jones. So Renato Jones Season 2, so this is the Freelancer storyline. This concludes a bombshell, literally a bombshell from the previous issue, where the acting president of the United States decides to launch a nuclear weapon and just decimates an entire city and then forces basically thermonuclear war upon the entire population of the globe. And he's holding the wealthiest among us for ransom. You know, wealthiest among us, I'm not talking about, you know, amongst you and amongst me, but I'm talking about the 1%, the 1% of the 1%, those kind of people that he has kind of hostage at his table. He's got tablets and all kinds of stuff, and there's some really interesting parallels that Carl Andrews is drawing with everything that's going on in the world, and it's just gonzo, gnarly, nasty violence, corruption. It's just like, it's like Carl Andrews is taking some of his inner monologue and just putting it on the page and creating something that's ridiculous in every sense, but it's engaging in very different levels, and you can see a lot of parallels, and if you want to see the symbolism, you can definitely do that, but it's just something that I've really enjoyed from the start, just because it's chaotic and it's fun, and it hits on some, you know, political parallels and all that kind of stuff. It's just a really interesting concept. So Renato Jones, not necessarily for everybody, but I have been enjoying it so much. It's just such an awesome story. I would definitely recommend going back to the first season, which is the first 5 issues, the first trade paperback of Renato, if it's something that you feel like you might be interested in. It's a great introduction if you can actually introduce yourself to this character. It's just something you jump right in with both feet on. And while I would love to jump in with both feet on the next storyline, the Oz Effect in Action Comics, this hasn't really been as special as I would have hoped. What we see is that Superman is still going around the globe. He finds the rebels. He finds the leader of the Republic that's actually acting against the rebels and, you know, going to destroy its own people using chemical weapons. And he basically grabs them out of their strongholds, brings them to the middle of a field, and then forces them to duke it out. And it's just like he is imposing peace by force in this respect, which is very much, you know, Superman at his wit's end. It feels like it's, you know, a resolution that he starts taking matters into his own hands and controlling the free will of the people that are in that area, which is probably a secondary motive of Jor-El at this point in time. I mean, he even goes so far as to grab, like, the tanks and the missiles and the rockets and just, like, melts them with his heat vision and leaves them, you know, decimated and without any kind of defense mechanism. So I can't wait to see what the aftermath of that is, because that's a decision that Clark can, you know, Kal-El can really blame on himself. And then we ultimately find that there is ulterior motivation to Jor-El. He, you know, talks to Superboy, gives him the lowdown on those kind of things, to the point where Superboy stops his dad's punch as he tries to take out his grandfather, and is like, no, if you don't understand, if we don't go, we're all gonna die. And it's just like, you know, that was just so disappointing in that respect. You know, I'm more concerned about the moral conundrums, and it doesn't feel like it's presented anything that's really kind of a stake-holding piece for this storyline. So I'm really hoping that the next issue is going to bring something out that's going to be a little bit more involved, but overall, Oz Effect has been a little bit underwhelming ever since we had the reveal. However, there is a book that continues to live up to my expectations, and that is X-O Manowar. So this is the second book out of the Valiant universe that I'm really enjoying, and I've been enjoying it since issue number 1. So first off, Clayton Crane's art is fantastic on this book. Matt Kint's writing a really great story, and we see Eric's continued reliance on the X-O Manowar armor, which is making him into a different person. And this is actually kind of compounded by his female, like his lover on this alien planet that has accepted him, took him into her home, and, you know, really showed the emotion, the devotion, the love that he wasn't really expecting out of such a foreign kind of world. But in the months that he's been conquering this entire planet, he's essentially taken down the cadmium, the burnt, the kind of monolith people, the mono people, and then he's finally at the doorstep of the Azure, and he gets to the point where, you know, he is forced to remove his armor, and then he finds that he is still flesh and bone, still a better man than what the Emperor is, and, you know, decimates him to the point where he has claimed ownership over this planet and is seeking to unify these people. But she finds him to be a completely different man, a different man that is not necessarily worthy or expecting of her love. The man that she loved is now gone. He is forever changed. So I'm interested to see where everything goes for Eric, because now that he has ascended to the top of this, it feels like it should be the victory for this person, but I feel like it's just the beginning of the end. You know, finding out that the change that he's made has kind of forced him to lose the love that he held so dear and what he went to fight for, is probably gonna, you know, signal some bad times for Eric in the future, which I can't wait to read because that's super interesting. So I'm very excited about that. Definitely something that I would recommend if you're even on the fence about Exo Manowar. Grab the first issue, grab the first trade, and see if it's something you're gonna enjoy, because I really enjoy it. Definitely something I recommend from Valiant. Another book that I'm definitely recommending right now, though, is Detective Comics. So Detective Comics comes in, and it's, you know, The Lonely Place of Living is a very different story than what I really expected, simply because we brought the Batman of Tomorrow, the Titans of Tomorrow storyline in there. You know, Tim Drake as the reluctant Batman that has essentially wiped out metahumans from the entirety of his planet. And we finally find out how he does it. So we see these kind of parallels. You know, first off, we have the relief of Batman as he's talking to Alfred. He's been hunting down Tim. He realizes that he missed something. The remains weren't necessarily what he thought. He buried ashes of somebody that could possibly still be alive, and he's been ignoring it for quite some time at this point. So he's like beside himself, and then all of a sudden Tim Drake's tracker comes on in Gotham because he's been bamfed back in there by the Batman of Tomorrow. So not only do we find Tim Drake in the hospital, Bruce comes in and reconnects. He reconnects with the entirety of this kind of Batman family, the Knights, you know, with the round table and everything. We finally get Tim's motivation for why he did those kind of things. But the real serious thing is that, first off, he's expecting Spoiler to show up. Spoiler doesn't show up. But when we take a look at Spoiler, the other Tim Drake is paying her a visit. Even though he doesn't have the courage or he doesn't have the desire to talk to her at that point in time, he does drop in to find out what she's doing. And then finally what we find is that Tim Drake, the prepared one from the future, has been fighting simulations of Damian, Jason Todd, and Dick Grayson for years, besting them every way that he possibly can. Which means that this is a particularly one-sided fight, with Tim Drake's future Batman kicking some ass. So then we're finally in the Batcave, and we find that Tim's true motivation is not just to kill Kate Kane, but to introduce and reignite Brother Eye, which is got a long history. So we're going to do a full review of Detective Comics, and I'm really excited to see where that one goes, but make sure you check out that video if you want to go a little bit more into detail on this actual story. Definitely a recommendation from me, definitely something you should check out. Another recommendation from me, and definitely a book you should check out, is The Flash number 33. So The Flash number 33 starts the Dark Knight's Metal Bats Out of Hell crossover, which is going to involve Flash 33, Justice League, and Hal Jordan, the Green Lanterns. So this is going to be a conflict between 4 different main characters. So we're going to be talking about Wonder Woman's going to be facing off against the Merciless. We're going to be talking about the Drowned facing off against Aquaman, the Red Death versus Flash, and then we have the last one is Green Lantern versus Dawnbreaker. And each of them have constructed their own death trap bat caves that are kind of suited for their own environs, and we're going to have to see the Justice League members best those individual Dark Knight versions of Batman. So it's really like a great setup issue. I was expecting a little bit more one-on-one between Flash and Red Death at this point in time, but if the story's going to truly continue between all 3 of these titles, I can see why this one's set up the way that it was. Definitely a great story. I really like everything about the art style. The art style feels great, and the setup is just, it's exactly what I needed at this point in time to spur me along when it comes to the Dark Knight's Metal event. Now we're going to get into new number 1s, and we have Eternity number 1 from Valiant. So Eternity number 1 is a continuation of the Divinity storyline. And Eternity, it focuses on a world outside of our normal world. And we've got Divinity, and we've got his wife, and their progeny, I believe as they're coined inside the book. Their son is stolen by these denizens of eternity, these things that were touched by divinity and left in their kind of perfect instances. And they crash land back on Earth after they've sent the bomb back to Earth. They find the followers of divinity, you know, the followers of God, and ultimately make their way over to Russia, steal the baby, and then take it back so that way it can replace an observer, you know, the person that is watching and recording and you know, like listening to all of eternity from this kind of unknown space outside of space. So I'm really interested to see where the storyline goes. It's a little bit weird, and the zealots that are, you know, like, no, you're supposed to take us with you, and it's like, nope, I'm not going to take you with you. I got to go get my son. We're going to go get our son. So I'm really interested to see where this goes. I have not followed any of the Divinity storyline. The only issue that I have is Divinity Zero, which gave me an introduction to the main character, Abram, but man, like, this just seems crazy. Like, I want to go read it all now so that way I can get a little bit more caught up. So if you are in the Valiant universe, Divinity, the Eternity #1 book, definitely a must read. If you're interested in the concept and you want to get all weirded out, definitely pick up Eternity #1, but it's not the best place for you to start if you have no real concept of the character in the universe. You could use it as a jumping on point, but be prepared to do a little bit of backstory research to get a little bit more fulfillment out of the actual story itself. And then the last book that I want to talk about is the big bad boy, and that is Batman The Merciless #1. So Batman The Merciless #1 continues the Dark Knight's metal tie-ins, the one-shots that really give us the origin story for all these individual Dark Knight Batmen, these evil versions of Batman that have taken the powers, or at least have been forced against the other Justice League members in alternate dark universes. And in this one, we're talking about Earth -12. So Earth -12 poses some pretty interesting things because I believe it's the DCAU, the DC animated universe, and it's the negative parallel of that. So we get the kind of meeting of the minds of all these various warmongers, and you got Argus, you got Task Force X, you've got Shade, you've got all this kind of stuff. These guys are meeting to decide the fate of the world, essentially, or to prepare kind of countermeasures for these Dark Knights, because Challenger Mountain appeared in Gotham 5 days ago. And what we see is the Merciless just jumps into Langley and devastates everything, because the Merciless is essentially Batman with the power of Ares, the god of war. And then we get the backstory as to why that happens. So there's so much cool stuff in this. You gotta recommend it. I gotta read it. I think that this is my favorite so far. I love Francis Manapul's art style. I really enjoy Peter J. Tomasi's writing. I can feel the motivation in those last 2 pages where we get a little bit more of a reveal. Super stoked on that. The whole Temple to Batman thing, so killer. But I'm going to do a full standalone review for Batman The Merciless #1, so definitely check that out so that way we can get a little bit more in detail when it comes to this particular story. Right now, must-buy book. Probably very much one of the strongest, if not the best. It's definitely my favorite out of the current one-shots. It's just awesome. But those are my thoughts on what I picked up this week, and I want to know what you guys grabbed too, and I want to, interact with you guys in the comments, so make sure you comment down below so we can start those conversations. Don't forget to subscribe to get entered into the drawing for Batman White Knight #1, signed by Sean Gordon Murphy, so that's going to be ending October 31st, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Limited time in order to get in on that. Also, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Again, subscribe if you want to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.